She screamed at everyone in the mansion like thunder crashing through a fragile glass house. But I'm the single dad janitor who tamed the billionaire's daughter with just one gesture. It sounds unbelievable, I know. Maybe you're finishing your rounds, checking the cameras, or closing the building while the world sleeps. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. My name is Marcus. I'm 62 years old, with hands that know every corner of this gleaming tower on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The smell of industrial cleaner and floor wax has been my cologne for 23 years. My uniform, navy blue with maintenance stitched in white letters, hangs loose on my shoulders now. Time does that to a man. The marble floors I mop every night reflect the city lights like mirrors, but they've never shown me my own worth. Not until that October evening when everything changed. I carry a ring of keys that jingle softly as I walk. Each key opens a door to someone else's world, the penthouse where Victoria Ashford lives with her father, the tech billionaire whose fortune in stocks and cryptocurrency made him untouchable. Their wealth in dollars seemed endless, built on investments that multiplied like wildfire. Bitcoin transactions worth millions flowed through their computers while I emptied their trash bins. I knew because I'd seen the discarded printouts, the casual mentions of portfolio adjustments worth more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. But money doesn't buy respect. I learned that the hard way, night after night, watching Victoria storm through those marble halls like a hurricane in designer clothes. She was 28, with her father's sharp eyes and her mother's cutting tongue, though her mother had died when Victoria was just 16. That loss had twisted something inside her, turned grief into rage that she aimed at everyone who dared breathe in her presence. My son Michael is 30 now, living in Brooklyn with his 2 kids. I raised him alone after his mother left when he was 8, said she couldn't handle being married to just a janitor. Those words still echo in my head sometimes, especially during the long nights when I'm pushing my cart through empty hallways. Michael works construction, proud and honest work, but he struggles to make ends meet. His daughter Sarah, my granddaughter, just turned 7. She has her grandmother's eyes and her father's stubborn smile. Every month, I send Michael $500 from my paycheck. It's not much, but it helps with Sarah's school supplies, maybe a new winter coat or soccer cleats. I keep a photo of them in my wallet, Sarah missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera while Michael lifts her on his shoulders in Prospect Park. That picture keeps me going when the Ashfords treat me like furniture. The penthouse spans the entire top floor, 12,000 square feet of marble, crystal, and gold fixtures. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer views of Central Park that real estate agents call priceless. The furniture costs more than most people's houses. I know because I've accidentally seen the insurance documents while emptying Mr. Ashford's office trash. Each piece is an investment, a symbol of wealth that grows while I scrub the floors beneath them. Victoria's tantrums started small. A sharp word here, a dismissive gesture there. But grief and privilege had fermented into something toxic. She'd scream at the doorman for being 30 seconds late opening her cab door. She'd throw her coffee cup at the wall if the temperature wasn't precisely to her liking, then watch me clean up the mess without a word of apology. Her voice could cut glass when she was angry, which was most of the time. I remember the night she fired the cook for using regular butter instead of the imported French kind her father preferred. The poor woman, Rosa, grandmother to 4, stood there crying while Victoria screamed about incompetence and standards. I helped Rosa gather her things, my heart breaking as she whispered, 20 years of service and she throws me away like garbage. That's when I first understood the pattern. Victoria didn't just inherit her father's wealth, she'd inherited his coldness, his ability to see people as disposable. But unlike him, she wielded that cruelty like a weapon, lashing out at anyone she could dominate. The other staff whispered about her in the service elevator. "She's gotten worse since her father started talking about marriage," said Janet, the head housekeeper. "Some billionaire's son from California. She doesn't want it, but Daddy controls the money." I filed that information away, understanding more about the rage that consumed her. My routine never changed. 5:30 in the morning. I'd take the subway from my studio apartment in Queens, a one-room place with a Murphy bed and a view of the laundromat across the street. By 6, I was pushing my cart through the Ashford penthouse, collecting trash, restocking supplies, checking that every surface gleamed. Mr. Ashford left for his office by 7, rarely acknowledging my existence beyond a curt nod. Victoria usually emerged around 10, already dressed like she was heading to a magazine photo shoot. Designer everything, from her shoes that cost more than my monthly rent to handbags worth enough to pay Sarah's college tuition. She'd storm through the apartment, shouting orders at whoever crossed her path. "The floors aren't shiny enough. Why does it smell like cleaning products in here? Can't you do anything right?" I learned to move like smoke, there but not there. Visible only when needed. It was a skill I'd perfected over 2 decades of service work. Invisible maintenance, they called it in the training manual. Keep things running without being seen or heard. But invisible meant disposable, and disposable meant forgotten. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October. I was polishing the brass rail on the grand staircase when I heard Victoria screaming on the phone with her father. Something about the arranged marriage, about not being a business asset to be traded like stocks on the exchange. Her voice cracked with genuine pain beneath the anger. "You think your money can buy everything," she shrieked. "Well, you can't buy me a soul." The call ended with her hurling the phone against the marble wall. It shattered like my heart, watching my own son struggle to make rent each month. But Victoria just stood there, chest heaving, mascara running down her cheeks like black rain. For the first time, I saw past the designer armor. She wasn't just a spoiled billionaire's daughter. She was a wounded girl who'd learned to hurt others before they could hurt her. Her fortune couldn't fill the emptiness her mother's death had left behind. Later that evening, around 11, I was finishing my rounds when I heard sobbing from the library. Victoria sat curled in one of the leather chairs, still in her designer dress but looking smaller somehow, vulnerable. On the side table sat a framed photo of a woman with kind eyes and Victoria's smile. Her mother. I should have walked away, should have maintained the invisible boundary between staff and family. But something in her broken posture reminded me of Sarah when she scraped her knee at the playground, hurt and trying so hard to be brave. I set down my mop bucket and approached slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. "Miss Victoria?" My voice was gentle, grandfatherly. "Are you all right?" She looked up, startled, as if seeing me for the first time. "What do you want?" The usual venom was there, but weaker, almost automatic. "Nothing, miss. Just wanted to make sure you're okay." "Why would you care?" The question held genuine confusion, like kindness was a foreign concept. I thought of Michael at that age, angry at the world after his mother left. "Because you're hurting, and when people hurt, they need someone to care." Something shifted in her eyes. For just a moment, the walls came down, and I saw the frightened girl underneath. "Everyone wants something from me," she whispered. "My father wants me to marry for business connections. His friends see dollar signs, even the staff." She gestured helplessly. "I don't want anything from you, miss. I've got everything I need." "A janitor who has everything?" Her laugh was bitter but curious. "I've got my son and granddaughter, my health, work that keeps a roof over my head. That's enough for any man." She studied me with new interest. "You have a granddaughter?" I pulled out my wallet, showing her Sarah's school photo. 7 years old, smartest kid in her class, according to her teacher, wants to be an astronaut. Victoria stared at the photo for a long moment. "She looks happy." "She is. Her daddy makes sure of that, even when money's tight." "Money's tight?" The concept seemed alien to her. "But you work for us. My father pays well." I almost laughed. "Miss, your family pays me enough to survive, nothing more." I didn't mention the $500 I sent to Michael each month, leaving me with barely enough for groceries and subway fare. Something clicked in her expression. You mean, you're not, she trailed off, finally understanding that I wasn't part of the wealthy world she inhabited. No, miss. I'm just a man who cleans floors and empties trash cans, but I'm good at it, and it's honest work. She was quiet for several minutes, just staring at Sarah's photo. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she has your eyes. People say that. Though I hope she inherited more of her father's stubbornness than my patience. That surprised a real laugh out of her. Patience is underrated. I've never had any. It's not too late to learn. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary happened. Victoria still had her moments. Years of learned behavior don't disappear overnight. But she began to notice me. Really notice. She'd apologize when she snapped at staff within my hearing. She started saying good morning when our paths crossed. One evening I found her waiting by the elevator as I finished my rounds. Marcus? My name sounded strange in her cultured voice. Could I see more pictures of your granddaughter? I showed her photos on my cracked phone screen. Sarah at her school play, building sandcastles at Coney Island, asleep with a book on her chest. Each image seemed to fascinate Victoria, as if she were seeing childhood for the first time. Does she know how much you love her? I hope so. We video chat every Sunday. She tells me about school, shows me her drawings. Last week she drew a picture of us at the zoo together. I didn't mention that I'd never actually taken her to the zoo, couldn't afford the admission and travel costs on the same weekend. Why don't you see her more often? The question hit harder than she meant it to. Work keeps me busy, and the subway to Brooklyn. I shrugged, not wanting to admit that the round-trip fare ate into my grocery budget. Victoria went quiet again, but I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. The next morning, I arrived to find an envelope on my cart with my name written in Victoria's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a check for $2,000 and a note for zoo trips and subway fare. Thank you for seeing me as more than my worst behaviors. I stared at that check for 5 full minutes. $2,000 was nearly 2 months' salary. But it wasn't the money that shook me. It was the acknowledgement. For the first time in 23 years of service, someone in this family had truly seen me. I found Victoria in the breakfast room, picking at expensive yogurt that cost more per container than I spent on food in a week. Miss Victoria, I can't accept this. Why not? Because I didn't do anything special. I was just being decent. She set down her spoon and looked me in the eye. Marcus, do you know how many people work in this building? The doormen, security guards, maintenance staff, cleaning crews. In 5 years of living here. You're the first person to speak to me like I'm human instead of a walking trust fund. Her words hit home because I recognized the loneliness in them. I thought of my own isolated years, invisible to the people whose lives I'd maintained. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, miss, rich or poor. My therapist has been telling me that for years, but hearing it from someone who actually practices it, she shrugged, it means more. That's when I learned about her therapy sessions, her guilt over her mother's death, her fear of becoming as cold and calculating as her father. The arranged marriage was just the latest way he was treating her like a business asset rather than a daughter. He says love is a luxury we can't afford, she confided during one of our evening conversations. That marriage should be strategic, not emotional. What do you think? I think he's terrified of caring about anyone again. When my mother died, it broke something in him. Building walls is easier than risking that pain. I understood that logic. I'd built plenty of walls after Michael's mother left, but watching my son become a father had taught me that walls also kept out joy. Maybe walls make us feel safer, I said carefully, but they also make us smaller. Victoria's transformation wasn't sudden or complete. She still had flashpoints of privileged impatience, but increasingly, those moments were followed by awareness, even apologies. She started learning the names of building staff, asking about their families, treating them like human beings instead of fixtures. The other employees noticed. Something's changed in Miss Victoria, Janet mentioned during our break. She actually thanked me yesterday for doing my job. Imagine that. But the real test came when Victoria's father announced the final arrangements for her engagement to Harrison Caldwell III, heir to a California tech fortune. The merger of their families would create a business empire worth billions, with cryptocurrency investments and stock portfolios that could influence entire markets. Victoria came to me that night, not screaming for once, but eerily calm. "He's done it. Set the date for Christmas Eve, says it'll be romantic, exchanging vows with the snow falling outside. How do you feel about it?" Like a prize horse being led to auction. She laughed bitterly. "Harrison's nice enough, I suppose. Harvard MBA, speaks 4 languages, knows wine better than I know coffee. But he looks at me the same way my father looks at his portfolio statements, calculating potential returns on investment. And what do you want?" She was quiet for so long, I thought she hadn't heard the question. Then, "I want what your son has. I want someone who looks at me the way he looks at your granddaughter in those photos, like I'm the most precious thing in his world, not because of my net worth, but despite it. That kind of love exists, but you might have to leave this penthouse to find it." "With what? I've never worked a day in my life, never even balanced a checkbook. Father's financial advisors handle everything. I'm 28 years old, and I don't know how to exist without his money." I thought about my own leap into single parenthood, the terror and freedom of making my own choices. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Sometimes it just means the choice matters. 2 weeks before the engagement party, Victoria made a decision that shocked everyone, including herself. She enrolled in night classes at Hunter College, basic business management and accounting. Nothing that would immediately threaten her father's control, but a first step toward understanding her own financial independence. "I need to know how money actually works," she explained. "Not just having it, but earning it, managing it, surviving without it if necessary." Her father was furious when he discovered the enrollment. I heard him shouting through the penthouse walls about ungrateful children and family obligations. Victoria stood her ground with a quiet dignity I barely recognized. "I'm not refusing the engagement," she told him calmly. "I'm just educating myself about the family business I'm apparently inheriting." It was a brilliant deflection. She'd turned rebellion into responsibility. The engagement party was scheduled for the first Saturday in December with 200 of the wealthiest families in New York. I worked overtime that week, helping prepare the penthouse for the event. Caterers transformed the living space into something from a magazine, with white flowers that cost more than my annual heating bill and champagne that could fund Sarah's education. Victoria moved through the preparations like a sleepwalker, trying on dresses worth more than cars, approving menus she'd barely eat. I watched her growing smaller beneath the weight of expectation. The night before the party, she found me in the kitchen, finishing the floor cleaning. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, miss." "Were you ever afraid when your wife left? About raising your son alone?" The question caught me off guard. Terrified. I didn't know the first thing about braiding hair or helping with homework or explaining why mommies sometimes go away. But you did it anyway. Had to. Michael needed me more than I needed to feel safe. She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about your granddaughter, about the way her face lights up in those photos. When's the last time you saw her in person?" The question stung because I knew the answer. 6 months ago, Michael brought her to Queens for my birthday. "Why so long?" I shrugged, embarrassed. Distance, work schedules, life gets busy. But Victoria saw through the evasion. "Money." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer, but my silence confirmed her guess. "What if I told you I've been thinking about Christmas presents and that I'd really like to give my friend Marcus something special?" "Miss Victoria, you already gave me more than enough." "Not money this time. A weekend off. Paid, of course. December 22nd and 23rd. My engagement party is Saturday night, which means Sunday. I'll need someone to help me recover from either celebration or catastrophe." Her smile was mischievous. "Think Sarah would like to see the Christmas displays at Macy's?" My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. Miss Victoria, I don't know what to say. Say you'll bring her here Sunday morning. I'd like to meet the girl who taught her grandfather about unconditional love. The engagement party was everything Victoria had dreaded, a business transaction disguised as a celebration. Harrison Caldwell III was exactly as she'd described, accomplished, articulate, and about as passionate as a quarterly earnings report. I watched from the kitchen doorway as he discussed their future like a merger agreement, complete with projected returns and strategic advantages. Victoria played her part perfectly, smiling and accepting congratulations from people who saw her engagement as a stock tip rather than a romance. But I caught moments when the mask slipped, a flash of panic when someone mentioned wedding dates, a flicker of sadness when Harrison described their practical partnership. Around midnight, after the last guests had departed and the caterers had finished cleaning, Victoria found me in the service area, packing away the industrial vacuum cleaners. "It's done," she said simply. "How do you feel?" "Like I just signed my own death warrant." She sat down on one of the folding chairs, still in her designer gown but looking utterly exhausted. "Do you know what Harrison said when I asked him about children? He said we should wait at least 3 years, let his tech investments mature before adding family complications to the portfolio." The clinical language made my chest tighten. "And what did you say?" "Nothing." What could I say? That I want babies who'll love me for bedtime stories instead of trust fund statements? She laughed bitterly. "I'm engaged to a man who sees fatherhood as a liability on his balance sheet." I thought about Sarah's spontaneous hugs, the way she'd crawl into my lap during video calls just to feel closer. Children aren't investments, they're miracles. I know that, now. But Harrison doesn't, and I'm not sure he can learn. "So what will you do?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her engagement ring, a rock worth more than most people's houses, but somehow looking cold and lifeless under the kitchen lights. "I'm going to meet your granddaughter tomorrow, and then I'm going to make some decisions." Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds. I met Michael and Sarah at the subway station in Midtown, my heart hammering with nervous excitement. It had been too long since I'd held her, smelled her strawberry shampoo, heard her laugh up close instead of through a phone screen. "Grandpa!" Sarah launched herself into my arms with 7-year-old enthusiasm, and suddenly everything else faded away. The penthouse, the Ashfords, the complicated emotions of the weekend, none of it mattered next to her bright smile. Michael looked good, tired but proud. She's been talking about this visit for 3 days straight, wearing her best dress, practicing her meeting fancy people manners. Sarah wore a red velvet dress that was probably hand-me-down but looked perfect on her. Her hair was braided with small white ribbons, and she clutched a handmade card in her mittened hands. "Is this for the rich lady, Grandpa? The one who gave you money for zoo trips?" "Money for what?" Michael's voice sharpened with concern and pride. I explained Victoria's generosity as we rode the elevator to the penthouse, watching Michael's expression shift from suspicion to amazement. "A billionaire's daughter wants to meet Sarah?" "A lonely young woman who's learning about real families," I corrected. Victoria answered the door herself, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Michael's monthly salary, but looked wonderfully normal. She knelt to Sarah's eye level immediately, her smile genuine and warm. "You must be Sarah. Your grandfather has told me so much about you." Sarah offered her handmade card with solemn ceremony. "I drew you a picture. Grandpa said you like to see happy families." The card showed stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a huge sun overhead. "Thank you for being nice to my grandpa," was written in careful 7-year-old letters. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she studied the drawing. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. Would it be okay if I hung it on my refrigerator?" "You have a refrigerator?" Sarah's amazement was complete. "Grandpa said rich people don't cook." Victoria laughed, a real laugh, lighter than I'd ever heard. "Well, I don't cook much, but I have a refrigerator for keeping juice boxes cold. Would you like one? The next hour was magical. Victoria showed Sarah the penthouse like it was a playground, pointing out the best views of Central Park, letting her touch the crystal chandelier, even carrying her up to the roof garden where snow was beginning to fall. Michael watched it all with the protective eye of a father, but gradually relaxed as he saw Victoria's genuine delight in Sarah's wonder. They talked about construction work and single parenting while Sarah explored, and I saw mutual respect growing between them. "She's not what I expected," Michael murmured to me, while Victoria and Sarah built a snowman on the terrace. "The way you described her tantrums, I thought." "People can change," I said simply. "Sometimes they just need someone to show them how." Around noon, Victoria suggested lunch at a nearby restaurant, nothing fancy, just good food, and insisted on including all of us. We walked through the snow to a cozy Italian place where Victoria was clearly unknown, just another customer instead of a celebrity. Sarah chattered through lunch, telling Victoria about school and friends and her dream of being an astronaut. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking questions and sharing stories about her own childhood visits to the planetarium. "My mom used to take me there," Victoria said quietly. "She said the stars reminded her that beautiful things could shine even in the darkness." "Where's your mom now?" Sarah asked with childhood's direct curiosity. "She lives in heaven now, but I think she'd like you very much." Sarah considered this seriously, then reached across the table to pat Victoria's hand. "My other grandma lives in heaven too. Grandpa says she sends me dreams sometimes." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "What kind of dreams?" "Happy ones. About flying and dancing and eating ice cream for breakfast." Sarah grinned. "Maybe your mom and my grandma are friends up there." "I think they might be." After lunch, Victoria surprised us all by suggesting the zoo, Sarah's dream destination. We spent the afternoon watching her delight in the penguins, lions, and elephant seals. Victoria bought her a stuffed giraffe that was almost as tall as Sarah herself, then insisted on photographs by every exhibit. As the day wound down, I could see Victoria's reluctance to let it end. She'd found something precious, a glimpse of the family warmth that all her money couldn't buy. "Can I come visit you again?" Sarah asked as we prepared to leave. Victoria knelt down, her voice serious. "I hope so, sweetheart, but I might not be living here much longer." "Where will you go?" "I'm not sure yet. Somewhere I can learn to be as brave as your grandfather." That evening, after Michael and Sarah had returned to Brooklyn, Victoria and I sat in the penthouse living room, surrounded by the luxury that suddenly felt hollow and cold. "She's incredible," Victoria said, holding the handmade card like a treasure, "so full of joy and curiosity. The way she looks at the world. Like everything's possible?" "Exactly. When's the last time I felt that way about anything?" I thought carefully before answering. "Maybe when you decided to take those night classes?" Victoria smiled ruefully. "One semester of accounting hardly makes me brave." "It makes you braver than you were 6 months ago." She was quiet for a while, staring out at the city lights. "Harrison called while we were at the zoo. Wanted to discuss honeymoon destinations. He's thinking Switzerland. Good for business networking," he said. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I let it go to voicemail." She pulled out her phone, showing me 17 missed calls and a string of texts. "He's not used to being ignored." "And your father?" "Flying back from Hong Kong tomorrow. He'll want a full report on the engagement party. Start planning the next phase." Her voice went flat. "The wedding's scheduled for May. Harrison thinks a spring ceremony will photograph well for the business magazines." The resignation in her voice broke my heart. "Miss Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What would you do if money wasn't a factor? If you could wake up tomorrow and live any life you wanted?" She didn't hesitate. "I'd move to a small town somewhere. Maybe teach elementary school. Have a garden, adopt a dog, learn to bake cookies that don't come from a $200 bakery." She paused. "I'd find someone who wants to build snowmen and go to zoo exhibits and doesn't care about my portfolio diversification strategy. That life is possible. Not for me, Not without giving up everything I've ever known. Sometimes everything we've known isn't worth keeping. Victoria looked at me with a mixture of hope and terror. Are you suggesting I run away from home at 28? I'm suggesting you run towards something better. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Harrison had been arrested in Los Angeles on charges of cryptocurrency fraud and tax evasion. The investigation had been ongoing for months, triggered by suspicious Bitcoin transactions and inflated stock valuations. The Caldwell family fortune, built on investment schemes that promised incredible returns, was apparently a house of cards. Victoria's father called from the airport, his voice tight with controlled fury. The engagement is off, obviously. Harrison's legal troubles make him unsuitable for our family's reputation. For the first time in months, Victoria smiled with genuine joy. Of course, Daddy. Whatever you think is best. Her unexpected compliance seemed to confuse him. We'll find another suitable match, perhaps one of the Steinberg boys, or that young pharmaceutical heir from Boston. This is just a temporary setback. Absolutely. Take your time. After she hung up, Victoria did something I'd never seen before. She laughed with pure, unrestrained delight. Marcus, do you know what this means? You're free? I'm free. She spun around the living room like Sarah had done the day before, arms outstretched. No wedding in May, no honeymoon in Switzerland, no husband who thinks children are line items on a budget spreadsheet. But freedom brought its own terror. Over the following days, Victoria wrestled with the reality of choice. Without the engagement to rebel against, she had to decide what she actually wanted. Her father began introducing new potential husbands immediately, a parade of accomplished, wealthy, emotionally unavailable men who saw marriage as a business merger. Victoria went through the motions, attending dinners and charity galas, but I could see her growing desperation. I can't do this again, she confided after a particularly painful evening with a pharmaceutical heir who spent dinner discussing market volatility. They're all the same, brilliant, successful, and absolutely dead inside. Then don't. Easy for you to say. You don't have to worry about disappointing a father who's built his entire identity around financial success and social status. I thought about my own father, a factory worker who'd never understood my choice to do service work instead of following him into manufacturing. Disappointing parents is part of growing up, even at 28. What if he cuts me off completely? I've never lived without money, Marcus. What if I can't survive? People survive on a lot less than you think. Look at Michael. He's raising 2 children on a construction worker's salary. Look at me. I've been happy enough on a janitor's wages. Happy enough? The question stopped me cold. Had I been happy? Content, maybe. Resigned, certainly. But happy? I've been satisfied with doing my duty, taking care of Michael, sending money to help with Sarah. But watching you discover joy these past few months, I paused, thinking of her laughter at the zoo, her delight in Sarah's drawings. Maybe there's a difference between surviving and living. That conversation happened on a Thursday evening in late January. By Friday morning, Victoria had made a decision that would shock her father and transform her life completely. She enrolled in a teacher certification program at Columbia. The announcement sparked the biggest fight I'd ever witnessed between Victoria and her father. Through the penthouse walls, I heard him raging about throwing away advantages and ungrateful children and family obligations. Victoria's response was calm but firm. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally picking something up. Teaching kindergarten is not a career for an Ashford. It's a career for Victoria, and that's who I want to be. When he threatened to cut off her trust fund, she surprised him with logic, learned from those night accounting classes. The trust fund is in my name, with distributions starting at 30. You can delay it, but you can't eliminate it. And I've saved enough from my monthly allowance to cover tuition and living expenses for 2 years. Her financial planning shocked him into silence. This wasn't the impulsive rebellion he'd expected. It was calculated independence. That weekend, Victoria began looking for apartments, not penthouses or luxury condos, but normal places where normal people lived normal lives. She found a one-bedroom in the village, walking distance from Columbia, with a view of a small park instead of Central Park. "It has a kitchen I could actually learn to cook in," she told me excitedly. "And the neighbors are teachers and artists and social workers, people who chose careers because they loved them, not because they paid well." Moving day was bittersweet. Victoria's father refused to help or even acknowledge her departure, maintaining the cold silence he'd perfected after his wife's death. But the building staff gathered to see her off, amazed by her transformation from demanding tyrant to gracious friend. "Miss Victoria," said Janet, the head housekeeper, "you've become someone your mother would be proud of." Victoria hugged her, the first time I'd seen her embrace any of the staff, with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for putting up with who I used to be." I helped load her belongings into the moving truck, struck by how little she was taking from her old life. No priceless artwork or designer furniture, just clothes, books, personal photos, and Sarah's drawing, now framed and carefully wrapped. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we stood in the empty penthouse one last time. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but it's a good kind of scared. The kind that means something important is about to happen." "I'm proud of you." She looked surprised. "Proud? Why?" "Because you chose love over money, chose becoming yourself over staying safe." Victoria's new life began humbly but joyfully. Student teaching in a second-grade classroom in Greenwich Village, she discovered talents she'd never known she possessed. Children responded to her genuine warmth. Parents appreciated her dedication, and colleagues welcomed her without knowing or caring about her family's wealth. She invited me to visit her new apartment on a Sunday afternoon in March. The contrast to the penthouse was startling. Simple furniture from IKEA, dishes from Target, artwork created by her students covering the refrigerator. But it felt warm in a way the marble palace never had. "I'm learning to cook," she announced proudly, serving me spaghetti that was only slightly overcooked. "And I joined a community garden. I'm growing tomatoes." More importantly, she was growing as a person. The sharp edges that had defined her for so long were softening into genuine kindness. She talked about her students with love and excitement, sharing stories about their drawings and breakthrough moments. "Tommy finally read a whole book yesterday," she told me, eyes shining. "And Maria wrote a story about visiting her grandmother in Puerto Rico. These kids have virtually nothing in terms of material wealth, but their imaginations are infinite." "Sounds familiar," I said, thinking of Sarah's creativity despite Michael's financial struggles. "That's just it. Money doesn't create happiness. I spent 28 years surrounded by wealth and felt empty inside. These children have so little but laugh every day." 6 months into her teaching career, Victoria made another life-changing decision. She started volunteering at an after-school program in the Bronx, not far from Michael's neighborhood, working with children who reminded her of Sarah, bright, curious, deserving of every opportunity. Through that volunteer work, she met David Chen, a social worker who had grown up in public housing and worked his way through college and graduate school. He was everything the pharmaceutical heirs and tech billionaires weren't: warm, funny, passionate about helping others, completely unimpressed by surnames or trust funds. Their first conversation happened over juice boxes and graham crackers during snack time at the community center. Victoria mentioned her family background casually, expecting the usual mix of awe and calculation. Instead, David laughed. "Billionaire's daughter turned elementary teacher? That's either the plot of a really good movie or you're running from something terrible." "Maybe both," Victoria admitted. "Well, as long as you're not running towards something worse, I guess that's progress." Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared values rather than shared net worth. David had never heard of Ashford Technologies, didn't follow cryptocurrency markets or stock portfolios. He measured success by children helped and families served, not dollars accumulated. When Victoria finally introduced him to me, I saw immediately what had captured her heart: David treated her like any other person, teasing her about her terrible cooking, challenging her ideas about education policy, making her laugh until she snorted with unladylike joy. "He doesn't care about my family's money," she told me after their first dinner together. When I told him about the trust fund, he just shrugged and said, "Good. Then you can afford to keep volunteering instead of needing a paying job right away." "What did your father say when he heard about David?" Victoria's expression darkened. "He had David investigated. Full background check, financial history, everything. When he discovered David grew up on food stamps and has student loans, Father called him a fortune hunter." "What did you say?" "I told him David's never asked me for a cent and doesn't even know the size of my trust fund. But Father can't understand loving someone for their character instead of their portfolio." The confrontation came to a head at Victoria's 29th birthday dinner. She had wanted a small celebration at her apartment, but her father insisted on hosting at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant, complete with potential new suitors from acceptable families. Victoria brought David, introducing him simply as someone special. Her father's reaction was swift and predictable, cold politeness masking obvious disdain. Through the evening, I watched from my position as the invisible server as Victoria's father made increasingly pointed comments about suitable partnerships and maintaining family standards. David handled it all with grace and humor, until Victoria's father made one comment too many. Of course, Victoria will need to reconsider her current associations when she inherits full control of her trust fund next year. "Actually, sir," David replied calmly, "Victoria's associations are Victoria's choice, and I'm not interested in her inheritance. I'm interested in her." "How convenient. A social worker who happens to fall in love with a billionaire's daughter." Victoria's face flushed with anger, but David just smiled. "Mr. Ashford, I fell in love with a second-grade teacher who keeps juice boxes in her purse and cries at children's Christmas pageants. The billionaire's daughter part honestly just makes dating more complicated." The honesty of that response left everyone at the table speechless. Even Victoria's father seemed momentarily uncertain. Later that night, Victoria called me from her apartment, crying with a mixture of joy and exhaustion. "He stood up for me, Marcus, not for my money or my family name. For me. That's what real love looks like. I think I want to marry him. What's stopping you? Fear, maybe? I've never had to choose between love and family before. If I marry David, Father might cut me off completely. Not just money, everything. I could lose any connection to the only family I have left." I thought about my own estrangement from my parents after I refused their career advice, the years of silence that followed my choices. Family that only accepts you conditionally isn't really family. It's a business arrangement. But what if I'm wrong? What if I choose love and it doesn't work out? Then I'll have nothing. Victoria, I've watched you become someone your mother would be proud of. Someone who sees value in people regardless of their bank accounts. Someone who finds joy in children's laughter and homemade drawings. That person doesn't have nothing. That person has everything that matters. David proposed on a snowy evening in December, almost exactly 1 year after Victoria's disastrous engagement party. No expensive restaurant or elaborate planning, just the two of them in the community garden where Victoria grew her tomatoes, surrounded by snow-covered raised beds and string lights. The ring wasn't a massive diamond, but a simple band with a small stone that caught the light beautifully. "It's not much by your family's standards," David said nervously. "It's perfect by mine," Victoria replied, and meant it completely. They married the following March, in a small ceremony at the community center where they'd met. Victoria wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers that cost less than a single stem from her engagement party arrangements. Her father didn't attend. His absence was painful, but not surprising. He'd made his choice to prioritize pride over love. But Michael and Sarah came, along with Janet and several other building staff members who had watched Victoria's transformation. Sarah served as flower girl, scattering petals with 7-year-old enthusiasm while wearing a dress Victoria had sewn herself in her newfound domesticity. The reception was potluck, nothing catered or professionally planned, just friends and colleagues sharing food and stories. Victoria's second graders had made her a card with 40 tiny handprints, and David's co-workers performed a song they'd written about love conquering social work bureaucracy. It was joyful in a way that money can't buy, filled with genuine affection rather than social obligation. As I watched Victoria dance with her new husband to music played from someone's phone, I thought about the screaming, bitter young woman I'd first met less than 2 years ago. The transformation was complete, not just external behavior, but internal peace. She found me during a quiet moment, still in her wedding dress but with shoes kicked off and hair coming loose from its careful arrangement. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." "Of course. None of this would have happened without you. Your kindness, your patience, your willingness to see something worth saving in me when no one else could." I felt tears starting. "You saved yourself, miss. I just held up a mirror. You did more than that. You showed me what real family looks like, not blood connections or financial dependencies, but people who care about each other's happiness." She hugged me then, this young woman I'd watched grow from wounded child into loving adult, and I felt a pride deeper than anything I'd experienced as a parent. "There's something else," she said, pulling back with a mischievous smile. "David and I have been talking about children, and when we have them, we'd love for their honorary grandfather to be someone who understands that love isn't measured in trust fund statements." The invitation to be part of their future family was the greatest gift I had ever received. Victoria's story didn't end with the wedding. It began there. She and David bought a small house in Queens, not far from my apartment, with a yard big enough for the children they planned, and a kitchen where Victoria continued learning to cook without burning down the neighborhood. She finished her teaching certification and got a full-time position at the elementary school where she'd student taught. David expanded his social work practice to focus on helping families navigate housing and security. Together, they built a life based on service rather than wealth, on shared values rather than inherited privilege. Victoria still had access to her trust fund, but she used it thoughtfully, establishing a scholarship program for children from low-income families, supporting the community center where she and David had met, ensuring that money became a tool for helping others rather than a burden of obligation. Her relationship with her father remained strained, but slowly began healing when Victoria gave birth to twin daughters 2 years later. The arrival of grandchildren softened something in him, reminded him of what he'd lost when grief had hardened his heart after his wife's death. I was there when Victoria brought the babies to meet their grandfather for the first time. Watching him hold those tiny girls, seeing tears in his eyes for the first time in years, I understood that love can survive even the deepest disappointments. "They have your mother's eyes," he whispered to Victoria, and in that moment, bridges began rebuilding. The babies, Emma and Grace, became the center of an expanding circle of chosen family. Sarah, now 10 and still dreaming of being an astronaut, appointed herself their official big cousin. Michael and David discovered shared passions for carpentry and basketball. Janet visited regularly, teaching Victoria family recipes that had never appeared in the penthouse kitchen. And me? I became what Victoria had promised, an honorary grandfather to children who would grow up understanding that love is measured in presence, not presence. On quiet Sunday afternoons, we'd gather in Victoria and David's small backyard, watching the twins crawl through grass while Sarah read them stories about space exploration. David would grill hamburgers that were nothing like the catered delicacies of Victoria's former life, but infinitely more satisfying. Victoria would laugh at something Sarah said, her joy so complete and natural that it was hard to remember the angry young woman she'd once been. These moments reminded me why I'd spent 23 years working in other people's homes, not for the security or the steady paycheck, but for the privilege of witnessing human transformation. I'd seen Victoria discover her capacity for love, watched fear transform into courage, observed money become a tool for service rather than a weapon of control. Sometimes I think about that night when I first found her crying in the library, surrounded by wealth but drowning in loneliness. One gesture, offering kindness instead of walking away, had changed both our lives forever. The lesson isn't that money is evil or that poverty is noble. The lesson is that our worth isn't determined by our bank accounts, but by our capacity to see and love each other across every barrier that society creates. Victoria taught me that transformation is possible at any age, that courage sometimes looks like giving up everything you've known for something better you've never experienced. I taught her that family isn't about blood or bank accounts, but about people who choose to care for each other's happiness. Today, at 65, I still work as a building superintendent, but now it's by choice rather than necessity. Victoria and David insisted on helping with my retirement planning, ensuring that my golden years would be comfortable and secure. But I continue working because I love the rhythm of it, the satisfaction of maintaining spaces where people build their lives. The difference is that now I'm seen, valued, respected. Victoria's transformation taught the entire building that service work deserves dignity. The residents know my name, ask about my family, treat me like the professional I've always been. And every Sunday, when I sit in that small backyard watching children play while their parents prepare simple meals with infinite love, I remember that the greatest fortunes aren't counted in dollars or Bitcoin or stock portfolios. They're counted in moments of connection, in gestures of kindness, in the courage to choose love over fear. But let me tell you about the most beautiful part of this story, the part that happened after Victoria and David celebrated their third wedding anniversary. It was a typical Sunday afternoon in their backyard, with Emma and Grace, now toddlers, chasing butterflies, while Sarah, 13 and taller than her grandmother had ever been, helped David assemble a new swing set. I was sitting in my usual spot, the lawn chair Victoria had designated as Grandpa Marcus's chair, watching this chosen family I'd somehow become part of. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "Dad, got some news. Can you call when you get a chance?" Something in his tone, even in text form, made my chest tighten. Michael was 33 now, settled in his construction job, but he'd never been one for dramatic announcements. I excused myself and walked to the quiet corner of the yard to call him back. "Dad?" His voice was thick with emotion I couldn't identify. "I got a call today, from a lawyer." My heart dropped. "Are you in trouble? Do you need money?" "No, Dad, not that kind of lawyer." He paused and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Remember Mom? Linda?" I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in years. Linda, who'd left when Michael was 8, saying she couldn't handle being married to just a janitor. Linda, who'd sent one postcard from Arizona and then disappeared completely from our lives. "What about her?" "She died, Dad, 3 months ago. Car accident in Phoenix." I started to respond, but he continued quickly. "The lawyer said she'd been trying to find us for the past few years. She left money. A lot of money." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What do you mean?" "She remarried, Dad. Some tech entrepreneur who started a software company in the 90s, made millions before he died 5 years ago. And when Linda died, she left everything to us, to me and Sarah, but mostly to you." I sat down hard on Victoria's garden bench, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "How much money?" $4.7 million. The number hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't see. $4.7 million. More money than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. More money than I'd ever imagined existing in connection to my name. "Dad, you still there?" "I'm here," I managed. I don't understand. Why me?" The lawyer said she left a letter, a long one, about regret and making amends and how she'd followed our lives from a distance. She knew about Sarah, about your job, about how you sent me money every month even when you couldn't afford it. His voice cracked. She said you were the best man she'd ever known, and leaving you was the biggest mistake of her life. I closed my eyes, feeling 25 years of hurt and confusion crashing over me like a wave. All those nights wondering if I'd been enough, if I'd failed somehow as a husband. All those years of watching other families while feeling like I was missing some crucial piece of the puzzle. "There's more," Michael continued. "She set up trusts for Sarah's education, full ride to any college she wants, graduate school if she chooses, and Dad. She bought that little apartment building in Queens, the one where you live. Bought it and put it in your name. You own your home now." I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe properly. Across the yard, I could see Victoria watching me with growing concern, David pausing in his swing set assembly. "The lawyer wants to meet with us this week, to go over everything, sign papers. Dad, you don't have to work anymore if you don't want to. You could retire, travel, whatever you want." After I hung up, I sat in Victoria's garden for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to process what had happened. Linda was dead. I felt empty about that, neither sad nor relieved. Just empty. But the money, the gesture, the attempt at making amends, that left me spinning. Victoria found me there an hour later, sitting alone while the family continued their Sunday routine without me. "Marcus, everything okay?" I told her everything. About Linda, about the money, about the letter I hadn't seen yet, but somehow knew would break my heart all over again. Victoria listened without interruption, her face cycling through surprise, concern, and something that might have been understanding. "What will you do?" It was the same question I'd asked her 2 years ago when Harrison Caldwell's arrest had freed her from an unwanted engagement. The same question that had led to everything good in her life since. "I don't know," I admitted. "For 25 years, I've defined myself by work, by service, by taking care of other people. If I don't have to work, who are you?" "Exactly." Victoria sat beside me on the bench, watching her daughters play while she chose her words carefully. "Do you remember what you told me when I was afraid to leave the penthouse, about the difference between surviving and living? That was different. You were young, you had your whole life ahead of you. Marcus, you're 65. With good health and this inheritance, you could have 30 more years. That's not the end of a life. That's the beginning of a new chapter." The meeting with the lawyer was surreal. Sitting in a Manhattan office that reminded me painfully of my years serving the Ashford family, I signed papers that transferred more wealth to my name than I'd ever imagined possible. The lawyer, a kind woman in her 50s, handed me Linda's letter with genuine sympathy. She asked that you read this alone when you're ready. I took the letter home but couldn't bring myself to open it for 3 days. It sat on my small kitchen table like an unexploded bomb, full of words that might explain everything or destroy what peace I'd found. When I finally opened it, Linda's voice came through as clearly as if she were sitting across from me. "Marcus, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if you'll tear it up the moment you see my handwriting. I wouldn't blame you. I left you with an 8-year-old son and no explanation that made sense. Not even to myself. I was 26 years old and terrified of being poor forever. Terrified of watching you work 3 jobs just to keep us fed and housed. Terrified that I'd wake up one day, an old woman who'd never seen anything beyond Queens and Brooklyn, never tasted food that didn't come from a can, never worn clothes that weren't secondhand. I thought I wanted more. I thought more meant money and status and freedom from the constant worry about rent and groceries. I was wrong about almost everything, but I was especially wrong about you. You weren't just a janitor. You were a man who took pride in honest work, who treated everyone with dignity regardless of their station in life, who raised our son to be kind and strong and decent. You were everything I should have valued, and I was too young and too scared to see it. I followed your life from a distance over the years. I knew when Michael got married, when Sarah was born, when you started sending him money every month. I knew you never missed a birthday card or a Christmas call, never stopped being the father he needed even when it cost you everything you had. I wanted to reach out so many times, to apologize, to try to make things right. But how do you apologize for breaking a family? How do you make amends for 25 years of absence? The money I'm leaving you isn't payment for what I took away. Nothing could ever equal that. It's just an acknowledgement that you deserved better than the life my leaving forced you into. Use it however you want. Travel, retire, spoil Sarah rotten. You've earned the right to think about your own happiness for once. I loved you, Marcus. I was just too broken to know how to love you well. Linda. I read the letter 3 times before the tears finally came. Not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of release. 25 years of wondering if I'd been enough, if I had failed her somehow, if there was something I could have done differently. Her words didn't excuse what she'd done, but they explained it in a way that let me finally put down the burden of the blame I'd been carrying. The next Sunday, I brought the letter to Victoria and David's house. I read it aloud to our chosen family, Victoria and David, Michael and Sarah, even little Emma and Grace, who were too young to understand, but seemed to sense the importance of the moment. When I finished, Sarah, now 13 and wise beyond her years, looked up from where she'd been coloring with the twins. "Grandpa, are you sad that she died?" I thought about it carefully. I'm sad that she never got to meet you, that she never got to see what a wonderful man your dad became, that she spent so many years carrying regret she didn't have to carry. But you're not sad that she's gone? I'm not sad that she's gone, because she wasn't really in my life anyway. But I'm grateful for what she left behind, not the money, but the explanation, the chance to understand and forgive and move forward. Victoria reached over and squeezed my hand. "What will you do now?" I looked around at this family that had grown around me like flowers in unexpected soil. Sarah bent over her coloring, tongue poking out in concentration. Michael and David debating the best way to install a tree swing. Victoria holding Grace while Emma climbed all over her like a jungle gym. This wealth of connection, this abundance of love. "I'm going to keep working," I said finally. "Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Work gives me purpose, keeps me connected to the world. But I'm also going to start living." What does living look like? Taking Sarah to astronomy camp this summer. Flying Michael and his family to Disney World, not because they need it, but because it would make them happy. Maybe taking some cooking classes so I can actually contribute to these Sunday dinners instead of just eating them. I grinned. And I'm thinking about traveling, seeing some of those places I cleaned brochures for but never thought I'd visit. Over the following months, my life transformed in ways I'd never imagined. I kept my job as building superintendent, but I also hired an assistant, a young man named Carlos who reminded me of Michael at that age, eager to learn and grateful for steady work. This gave me flexibility to take time off without leaving my residence without service. I enrolled in a community college cooking class, where I was the oldest student by 30 years but not the worst cook, which surprised everyone including me. I learned to make pasta from scratch, to properly season vegetables, to create meals that brought people together around tables. Most importantly, I started traveling with Sarah. We went to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where she pressed her 13-year-old nose against display cases and peppered NASA guides with questions about rocket fuel and orbital mechanics. We visited the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where she marveled at the Hope Diamond, but spent most of our time in the Air and Space Museum. "Grandpa," she said during our flight home from D.C., "do you think Great-Grandma Linda would have liked these trips?" I'd told Sarah about Linda, about the letter and the inheritance that made these adventures possible. She'd listened with the serious attention she gave to everything important, then said she was sorry Linda had been so scared for so long. "I think she would have loved seeing you learn about the things that make you happy. I think she would have been proud to know her gift helped create these memories. Even though she didn't really know us? Sometimes love means hoping good things for people even when you can't be part of their lives." The most unexpected change came when Victoria approached me about joining the board of her scholarship foundation. She'd been using her trust fund to help children from low-income families access educational opportunities, and she wanted someone who understood both sides of the economic divide. "You've spent your whole life serving wealthy families," she explained. "You understand their world. But you also raised a son on a janitor's salary. You know what it means to stretch every dollar. You could help us identify kids who really need help and make sure we're supporting them in ways that actually matter." I'd never imagined myself in a boardroom, wearing a suit and discussing fund allocation strategies. But I discovered that my years of invisible service had taught me to see things others missed, the difference between want and need, the dignity required in receiving help, the importance of treating aid recipients as whole people rather than problems to solve. My first board meeting was terrifying. Sitting around a conference table with Victoria, David, several educators, and 2 other community leaders, I felt completely out of place. But when we started discussing applications, I found my voice. "This girl, Maria," I said, reading from a file, "straight A's, works 20 hours a week at her family's restaurant, wants to study engineering. But look at this. She's asking for book money and laptop rental, not tuition. She probably qualified for financial aid, but doesn't know it. Someone should help her navigate the FAFSA process, maybe connect her with a mentor in engineering." Victoria smiled proudly. Exactly the kind of insight we need. Within a year, I was traveling to high schools in underserved neighborhoods, talking to students about college possibilities, not as someone who'd attended college myself, but as someone who understood the leap of faith required to reach beyond your circumstances. I was a janitor for 40 years, I'd tell auditoriums full of teenagers. I cleaned the offices of people who made more in a day than I made in a year, but I learned something important. Success isn't about what you do for work. It's about how you do it, and the same principles that made me good at my job, attention to detail, treating everyone with respect, showing up reliably, those will make you good at whatever you choose to do. Some students connected with that message, others didn't. But the ones who did, the ones who saw past the limitations their circumstances seemed to impose, those were the ones our foundation could really help. As I approached my 70th birthday, I realized Linda's inheritance had given me something more valuable than money. It had given me permission to dream. For 40 years, I'd focused on duty, on getting through each day, on making sure my son had what he needed. I'd never allowed myself to imagine what I might want just for me. Now, sitting in Victoria's backyard on a warm Sunday evening, watching Sarah, now 16, explain orbital mechanics to Emma and Grace. While Michael and David argued good-naturedly about baseball statistics, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete contentment with my own choices. I'd used Linda's money wisely, setting aside enough for a comfortable retirement, establishing a fund for Sarah's ongoing education, helping Michael with a down payment on his first house. But mostly, I'd used it to build connections, to create experiences, to turn surviving into living. The greatest gift wasn't the inheritance itself, but what it had taught me about possibility. At 65, I'd learned to cook. At 67, I'd spoken at a college graduation ceremony. At 68, I'd traveled to Italy with Victoria's family, marveling at ancient architecture while Emma toddle explored Roman piazzas. At 69, I'd watched Sarah win a national science fair with a project about sustainable energy that I barely understood but supported completely. Every step of the way, I'd been surrounded by this chosen family that had grown from one simple gesture of kindness in a billionaire's library. "Marcus?" Victoria appeared beside my chair, now 35 and even more beautiful than she'd been as an angry 28-year-old. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how strange life is, how one conversation can change everything." "Speaking of conversations," she settled into the chair next to mine, "David and I have been talking about the future, about legacy, about what we want the girls to understand about family and love and service." "Oh?" We want to ask you something, and you can absolutely say no, no pressure at all." I waited, curious. "We're thinking about having another baby. We're not getting any younger, and Emma and Grace keep asking for a little brother or sister. And if we do—" She paused, looking almost shy. "We'd like to name him Marcus, after the man who taught their mother what real family looks like." I felt my eyes fill with tears for what seemed like the 1,000th time since Victoria had entered my life. "You'd do that? Marcus, you've been more of a father to me than my own dad for most of my adult life. You've been the grandfather Emma and Grace deserved, the mentor I needed, the example of how to care for people without expecting anything in return. Of course, we'd want to honor that." 6 months later, I held baby Marcus David Chen in the same hospital where I'd once held Sarah 16 years earlier. This tiny person, barely 6 pounds but already fierce in his determination to make his presence known, would grow up in a world where love mattered more than money, where service was valued over status, where family meant the people who chose to show up for each other, day after day. Looking into his wrinkled face, I thought about all the Marcuses who had come before, myself, struggling to raise a son alone while working multiple jobs, my father, factory worker who'd never understood my choices but loved me anyway. Probably more Marcuses stretching back through generations, each one doing their best with the circumstances they'd been given. This baby would have advantages none of us had enjoyed: financial security, educational opportunities, parents who understood both privilege and responsibility. But hopefully, he'd also inherit the values that money can't buy: kindness, humility, the understanding that our worth isn't measured in dollars but in how we treat each other. As I write this story, baby Marcus is 6 months old, crawling with determination and babbling happily at anyone who'll listen. Emma and Grace adore their little brother, taking turns reading to him and showing him their favorite toys. Sarah, now 17 and headed to MIT on our foundation scholarship, she insisted on applying like any other student, helps with babysitting and fills his ears with stories about space exploration and the possibilities waiting among the stars. I still work as a building superintendent, though I've trained Carlos to take on more responsibilities. I still attend board meetings for Victoria's Foundation, still speak at high schools about possibility and perseverance. I still spend Sunday afternoons in that same backyard, watching this chosen family I somehow stumbled into create memories that will last long after I'm gone. And late at night, when the city is quiet and I'm finishing my rounds in the building I now own, I sometimes think about that October evening when I found Victoria crying in the library. One gesture, choosing compassion over invisibility, changed not just her life but mine, and now the lives of children who will never know my name but will benefit from the ripple effects of that single moment of kindness. The lesson I've learned, the one I try to pass on to the students I speak to and the young families our foundation helps, is simple. We never know when our small actions might create enormous change. The door we hold open, the smile we offer, the moment we choose to see someone's pain instead of walking past, these gestures matter more than we can possibly imagine. Victoria taught me that wealth isn't about money and bank accounts, but about richness of connection, depth of love, the ability to see beauty in ordinary moments. I taught her that service isn't about servitude, but about dignity, that kindness isn't weakness, but strength, that family isn't about blood, but about choice. Together, we've built something beautiful, a legacy of love that extends far beyond our own lives, touching children and families and communities in ways that compound like interest, growing stronger with each act of generosity and compassion. Have you ever been in a situation where one small act of kindness changed everything? Maybe you've worked for people who made you feel invisible, or perhaps you've been the one who needed someone to see your worth beyond your circumstances. If this story touched you, please share it and subscribe. Every story like this that reaches someone new is another chance for transformation to begin. we've created a special podcast filled with equally heartfelt stories of ordinary people discovering extraordinary courage. You can find it by clicking the link on the left. Thank you for joining me on this journey of the heart. I'll see you in the next story.